So tonight we start with story work, which is now called story driver, action or decision. The question is, not is it an action story or a decision story, like you might say that's an action picture or that's a decision picture in the movies, but in fact it's what drives what. Do actions drive decisions, or do decisions drive actions? Now actions driving decisions, that's for example like there's an earthquake and a building collapses, and as a result of it, everyone who's involved in the company that used to be housed in that building must now figure out what to do next, where are they going to go, how are they going to keep the business going, and so on. An action caused a decision, caused a series of deliberations and decisions. That's quite unlike a decision story where perhaps a princess says, you know, I'm going to marry somebody by the end of the week. I don't know who yet, but I'm going to marry somebody by the end of the week. Well, as soon as she's made that decision, then everyone has to spring into action, because now all the suitors are going to come in to try and win her hand. Her father, the king, was going to try and arrange the marriage that he wants her to have. The thing is that once you have set up a causal relationship in a story between action and decision, throughout the rest of the story, that will be the driver. So if an action kicks things off, gets the story going, it's what makes the story begin to happen, then at that point it will be a decision that follows, and then everything will sort of get resolved. All the decisions that need to be made, all the deliberations that need to be made in order to make sure that everything is where it ought to be as a result of that action, it's all taken care of, everything's settled, and then another action comes in to get it all messed up again. Then everybody has to go around deliberating again, making decisions again, and finally they've got it all handled, everything again is in a status quo, some new stable position, and then another action comes in and gets things going. So that's why it's the driver. It's not like an action kicks it off and then the whole rest of the story is about deliberation. It's also important to remember, though, that just because an action kicks it off and it's an action story, that doesn't mean that the story is going to be filled with action. It could be a single precipitous action that happens, and then it requires a lot of deliberation and decision making, and then one more quick action and a lot of deliberation and decision making. So a story might feel more like a deliberation story if it's kicked off by action, but actions are just used as sparking points, and then everything else uses up that energy until it's gone. Similarly, you could have a story that's a decision story that starts with somebody deciding something, and then all kinds of action breaks loose, all kinds of things must be done. And finally, when all that action is taken care of, everything's stable again, and then another decision's made. That's going to feel like an action story because it has a lot more action than deliberation or decision. But it's the causal relationship, what kicks it off. Now this is an unfamiliar way of thinking in stories. You feel, oh, if there's a lot of decision, it's a decision story. That's how people label things in real life. They look at what there's most of, and that's what they call it. Not a lot of people stop to look at the time side of things. What precedes what? And even if a little tiny thing like decision precedes a lot of action, they still look at it as an action substance because it's mostly filled with action. For our purposes, make sure that when you're answering this question for your story, what is your story driver? What kind of work is done in your story? Action or decision? It's what's going to kick things off, not what the whole thing is going to feel like. And the last point before we look at our video clips on this particular question is, if you start with an action, you're going to need to end with an action. You have to bookend your story. So if some action messes things up like an earthquake, then at the end, somebody's going to have to take some kind of a flying leap, rappelling down with a rope into the rubble caused by the earthquake to do something. It's the action that will finally bring it closure. If a decision starts the story rolling, then a decision is going to be required at the end to bookend it and wrap it up. It's the only way that you can stop it. Otherwise, the cycle will just continue. Action, decision, action, decision, action, decision. Because it's a causal relationship, whatever kicks things off, that's the driver. Everything else is the result of that driving. So only if you go back and drive things back in another direction, only then can you stop the cycle from repeating yet again. That's why an action must be closed by an action, a decision closed by a decision.